this is like probably the 20th time I've tried to record this intro, and I'm hoping that this will be the last time. So this video is going to be about installing my Radium Surge tank in the Mazda 3. It is currently day probably like 40 or something of quarantine. I originally was going to do like Coronacation day 3 or whatever for this video, but I kept delaying the video so long that I lost track of the count of days. But whatever, that's fine. So we're in May, and I've installed the Surge tank. It's already done, and I just kind of wanted to go over the install and give my thoughts on the Surge tank. So for those of you who don't know, what a Surge tank is it's basically a reserve tank of fluid, in this case fuel, that will kick in when the main tank runs low. So in my case, I get fuel slosh. What happens is the fuel sloshes away from the pump in a turn or at high rates of acceleration if I don't have enough fuel in the tank. And by not enough fuel in the tank, I mean anything less than 3/4 of a tank. So at the same time, when the fuel sloshes away, the Surge tank already has half a gallon of fuel in it because it's constantly being filled from the main tank. So what happens is the Surge tank just continues to supply fuel to the engine, and you know that reserved fuel gets low, but as you have about 30 seconds to a minute worth of fuel in there. So as long as your main pump, your lift pump, is not starved for a minute, then with the fuel, when it comes back, it'll continue to refill the Surge tank and the car will continue to function as normal. I ended up going with a Radium unit, and the reason I went with the Radium unit was because most Surge tanks are just a tank and you have to supply an inline pump, pumps the fluid in there and then back out. The Radium Surge tank is a nice all-in-one solution because you can put the fuel pump inside the tank, so you can consolidate everything and then just mount everything in one convenient location and run your lines from there. Okay, so this is the finished product for the Surge tank. It's mounted in my trunk. So I'm just gonna go over the install real quick. There's 4 ports on the Surge tank. The only one that matters is this green one in the back here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's green. The rest of them are black. So the green one is what's going to be your fuel feed to your engine. So that's the one, the pump, my AEM pump is in here, and it's going to be going through this line. The other 3 lines are just returns. So this is going to be your return from the fuel rail. This is going to be your return to the lift pump, and then this is going to be your feed from the lift pump. So it doesn't matter how you have these set up on the Surge tank. You know, this one could be here, and then this one could be here, and so on and so forth. The only one that matters is the green one. Also, Radium gives you this flying lead, so you just ground it somewhere. And then for me, I ran a switch to the front of the car. That way I can turn this pump on and off at will, and eventually I want to hook this pump up to an ignition based source, but until I do, I have to control this pump manually with that switch. So also note that Radium states if you're when you're feeding fuel into the Surge tank, you have to have some kind of inline filter. Inline fuel filter here, it's 10 microns. It has to be 10 microns. That way you could filter anything that could potentially damage the fuel pump or damage your engine. And then the one thing I want to note for this install is I thought that you did not need a return to your main fuel tank. I thought that the Surge tank could function as a return. So originally I had capped one of these fittings off because I just installed a brand new OEM pump, and I installed a brand new OEM pump and didn't modify it. But it turns out I did need to modify it. I did need to drill at least 1 hole into it just to put a bulkhead fitting to have a return. And what this does is it functions as a pressure relief. That way you're not deadheading the Surge tank, and that way it doesn't pressurize the tank either. Because before I did this, my fuel pressure gauge was reading about 80 psi when it's supposed to be reading 43.5. After I did it, it went back to the 43.5, which it was supposed to be reading. Previously, if I was on track and I didn't top off after every session, then I would get fuel slosh about halfway through the next session on taking like right turns, left turns, whatever it may be. and on average I used about 3 gallons of fuel every track session. So I had to make sure to have enough fuel. If I was driving on the street, when I got to about half a tank of gas, if I went into boost, it would lean out after like 3,500 to 4,000 RPMs. And if I took a right turn too fast, and we're talking about like a right turn, like a 15 mile an hour right turn onto my block, the pump would starve. As a test, I ran the tank as low as I could get it just to see when the car would start acting up, and I got to a little under a quarter tank of gas before I started getting starvation issues again, and before I could hear the pump cavitating. It was making these little gurgling sounds, so there was definitely air in the air in the surge tank. So I would say that's pretty good. I don't have to top off anymore. I could run the car like a normal car now, right? Just fill up at a quarter tank of gas. So that's great. I'm looking forward to using this on track because it's going to be nice not having to worry about my fuel in between sessions. So overall, successful install. I'm really happy with the product, and if you're going turbo, especially in a Mazda 3, I highly recommend this. And the reason I say because of Mazda 3 is because of the design of the stock fuel tank. The stock fuel tank puts the fuel pump all the way in the front, so it's going to starve regardless if you're running any higher than normal power levels. Now I will say I never had this problem on when I was on like 7 psi boost, probably making whatever 220 wheel horsepower on 93. So maybe the problem has worse because I'm on E85 now and I'm making 350 wheel horsepower on my track tune. So maybe that's why I'm having such a significant problem with it now. But regardless, if you're going to be racing your car, if you're going to be if you want to protect your car, I highly recommend having a surge tank. So that's all for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later.